A funeral service was held for George Floyd in Houston, Texas, Tuesday. Family and friends gathered to pay a final tribute as protests in his memory continue nationwide. Danya Bacchus has the latest.
Police officers saluted as George Floyd's casket was carried into the Fountain of Praise Church in Houston. Family members arrived wearing white for a private service in the city where Floyd grew up.
I just want to say that I'm going to miss my brother a whole lot, and I just want to say to him, I love you.
The Reverend Al Sharpton delivered the eulogy.
This was not just a tragedy. It was a crime.
Joe Biden joined with a video message.
Now is the time, the purpose, the season to listen and heal. Now is the time for racial justice.
Floyd's death in Minneapolis, where a police officer knelt on his neck for nearly 9 minutes, has inspired a nationwide movement against racial injustice. But today in Houston, it was a time for reflection.
Nothing is more important right now than the family. Just making sure we're doing whatever we can as a city, as a department, to put our arms around this family and help them to get through this moment.
The funeral service was by invitation only, but yesterday the church opened to the public and mourners poured in by the thousands. Families of other black men who died at the hands of police came to grieve. Eric Garner's mother remembered his death 6 years ago.
My son said, I can't breathe. 11 times he said, I can't breathe. Floyd, he said, I can't breathe, and called for his mother. He was calling for all of us mothers. All of us. And his mother was welcoming him home.
Today, that comes true. Arriving at the Pearland Cemetery in a horse-drawn carriage, 46-year-old George Floyd will be laid to rest next to his mother.
Danya Bacchus joins me now. Danya, you were able to watch the service. What moments stood out most to you?
You know, Elaine, what stood out to me is that we were reminded of who George Floyd was before his death sparked a national movement. He was remembered by family and friends as a father, a brother, a nephew, and a son. The family and friends shared those memories of Big Floyd, as they called him. They said he was a gentle 6'6" giant, that he was a tight end for his high school football team and also a power forward for his basketball team. There were also a lot of calls for change. I don't think I've ever seen that at a funeral before, where people were still calling for change around his death. Almost every speaker mentioned it, either saying that it was time for a change, that it was time for unity, and they credit Floyd's death for the change that is happening.
And Danya, who actually attended this private funeral?
We knew from the very beginning that there was going to be a long list of dignitaries and celebrities who were going to be at the funeral today. And some of the people that we did see, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, she spoke. Houston Texan J.J. Watts was there. Actors Jamie Foxx and Channing Tatum were also there. And then the Floyd family was joined by a very special group of people who understand the grief that they're going for, families who have suffered similar losses. The families of Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Botham Jean, and Ahmaud Arbery were all in attendance.
And Danya, hundreds of people lined up along the procession route after the funeral. What was the scene like there?
Well, where we are, we weren't able to see that processional route. We have been told that people will be lining up on the streets. And if it's anything like we saw yesterday with the thousands of mourners coming here because there was a public viewing, we know that they probably will be lining the streets. Many people feeling compelled to be here, feeling compelled to be a part of this moment, wanting to pay their final respects to George Floyd and also show the support for the Floyd family. The service today was an invitation-only funeral service. We were told that about 500 people were going to be allowed inside, and at the end of the service, the numbers we heard were greater than 500. But even outside, there were people here in the parking lot who knew that they weren't going to be able to get inside of the funeral, but still they were here. They had on shirts, they had signs, just to show support for the family.
And Danya, you mentioned how there were these calls to action, calls for justice during the funeral service itself. What was said during that service today about George Floyd and his death that fuels this movement and causes it to sort of move forward in the way that we have seen it continue to do here in the last couple of weeks?
You know, a lot of the speakers were saying, don't let it stop here. Don't let it stop with the funeral service. Reverend Al Sharpton was saying that they were going to continue to be with the family until the last media truck left. They said that they have to continue to protest, calling people to continue to demand change, continue to demand reform when it comes to police departments, continue to demand that police officers are held to the same standards of law as regular citizens. So that's how they were talking about moving this movement forward and not letting it stop here, not letting it stop with the arrest of the 4 officers, but continuing this movement until there is a conviction for those officers, and then until we see other officers who may not uphold the standards of their department also charged and convicted if they do something wrong, like use excessive force.
And Danya, so those are the leaders of these movements, but I know you've also had a chance to talk to people on the ground, and I take it their message is very much the same.
Yeah, it is very much the same. I think people are still trying to figure out how we move this forward. I did speak to a couple of people who said they're not going to stop here. They're not going to stop just because there was an arrest in this case. They're not going to stop. They remember the families of those people who I mentioned before when we talk about Michael Brown and Eric Gardner and Ahmaud Arbery, who that case is still ongoing right now. So I think people are still trying to understand how they can come together, how they can rally, what kind of activism is needed to continue to push change forward. We do see that police departments, for example, are listening to the cries of some of these protests. We know that in some cities, in Los Angeles where I live, they're talking about defunding police departments, removing some funds that we're seeing for police departments go to being reinvested in communities. So I think people are really trying to understand how they work with city leaders to make sure that change is happening, and then how they also continue to move this movement forward.
Okay, Danya Bacchus for us. Danya, thank you very much.